Well, while all eyes are on Ukraine, Palestinians have once again been under attack by Israeli forces. Tensions have escalated between the two groups during this holy month, Muslims celebrating Ramadan and Jews celebrating Passover. Both groups fight over holy sites that are important to both Abrahamic religions, particularly a site that is known as Al-Aqsa Mosque by the Muslims and Temple Mount by the Jews. On Friday, April 15th, Israeli soldiers stormed the mosque, injuring over 160 Palestinians and arresting more than 400. Video began circulating online of Israeli soldiers indiscriminately attacking unarmed women, the elderly, and disabled. There have been other incursions in cities inside the West Bank that have led to the deaths of over a dozen Palestinians. The deaths include a 14-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy, a 34-year-old lawyer, and a half-blind widow with 6 children. The woman was thought to have a knife. She didn't. One of the boys threw a Molotov cocktail, and the lawyer had at one point participated in clashes. In response to the attacks, Hamas fired rockets from Gaza into Israel that were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system and didn't cause any real damage. Yet in response, the Israelis conducted airstrikes on Gaza, hitting what they say was a Hamas weapons depot. Now, it would be unfair to act like the Palestinians are completely blameless. There have been mass shootings and stabbings conducted over the past few weeks that have left numerous Israelis dead. But here's Mehdi Hassan explaining why this conflict isn't really a both sides issue.
Now it's time to hand over to my friend Ayman Mohyeldin. But before I do, Ayman, a topic that you and I have covered for years is back in the headlines, especially since Friday. Israel's occupation of East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, and the violence we're now seeing in and around one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. More than 170 people injured, more than 20 Palestinians killed. What bothers me, Ayman, is that some of the headlines in the news really don't do justice to the nature of that violence on the ground. It's always about clashes. In my view, a bit of a lazy journalistic term because it doesn't identify who or what is driving the violence. Clashes implies two equal sides with equal powers, doesn't it? Two equally responsible parties for the violence. And yet the missing context here always matters. One side is the occupier, the other side is occupied. One side right now in Jerusalem is throwing stones, yes. The other side is firing stun grenades and rubber bullets, including reportedly into people's eyes. And look, I get it. The Israelis have their security concerns. You have more than a dozen people in Israel killed, many others wounded over the past few weeks in horrific shootings and stabbings. And we all, of course, condemn those attacks on innocent civilians. But, Ayman, that doesn't justify, though, the scenes we're seeing in Jerusalem right now. It doesn't justify an Israeli operation inside one of Islam's holiest sites during this month of Ramadan. I'm pretty sure people would be up in arms if the American government, say, was violently raiding a major church during Easter, would they not?
Palestinians feel their land and homes are being taken from them, and what they're doing by throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails is defending their existence. They're vastly underpowered compared to the Israelis. Every time they've fought back, they have lost more land and lost more of their rights. So I want to point out some obvious hypocrisy. Where are the Palestinian flags and the hashtags like I stand with Palestine? Right now on social media, it seems like half of everyone has changed their profile to include a Ukrainian flag. People can talk freely about the atrocities happening against the Ukrainians and even champion them making homemade weapons to defend themselves. Yet these same people turn around and condemn Palestinians when they do the same. Here's a great example. This is Aviva Klampas, who was the head of speech writing for the Israeli mission to the UN. Here she is posting a photo of young Palestinians holding rocks, mocking people, calling them worshippers. Yet when it comes to Ukrainians making Molotov cocktails, she's praising them. She even has homage to Zelensky pinned to the top of her page. Now, Bella Hadid, a supermodel who is Palestinian, has her social media account regularly suspended for showing the atrocities being committed against Palestinians. And as Mehdi Hassan has pointed out, the atrocities committed against Palestinians gets labeled as clashes, whereas the war in Ukraine is often labeled as a genocide. In fact, we've even watched White House reporters badger the Biden administration to escalate the war on behalf of the Ukrainians. We must save them from their nuclear-armed, more powerful neighbor engaging in this unlawful land grab and massacre, they shout. Well, the same thing's happening essentially to the Palestinians. Even Tony Blinken, someone who's been actively refusing to support peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, is in fact calling for peace between Israel and Palestine. During phone calls with both the Israelis and Palestinians, Blinken stressed the importance of Israeli and Palestinian working to end the cycle of violence in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza by exercising restraint and refraining from actions that escalate tensions. Meanwhile, the U.S. is expected to announce in the coming days another round of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons being sent to Ukraine. So it's very hypocritical. That's the big thing that I want to point out. I want to also mention that though these tensions are horrific right now that are going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the abuses on the Palestinians are very atrocious. Luckily, they're not as bad as they were last year when we all were horrified by the attacks on Gaza last May. They're not expected to escalate to that point, largely because of the new government. Netanyahu was much more of a hardliner, much more about punishing the Palestinians, showing them who's boss. The current government, Naftali Bennett, is not as, he's way more interested in keeping peace and minimizing destruction and death, largely because the coalition that they have right now in the government is very fragile. So we're not likely to see, serious escalations like we saw last year in Gaza, for example, many more of those airstrikes. But it is really horrific.